Welcome back to KMI Community Connect viewers. This is going to be an interlude for part 9. So far we have discussed a little bit recently about glucose, fructose, how they are different from each other, and how fructose activates a different kind of pathway to actually make more fat and provides a different kind of a signal and fat making in the wrong areas, which is like liver. And what are those substances and what is the state of our body where we can make more fat from fructose. And last time in part 8 we also discussed a little bit about how drinking of fruit juice or how drinking sodas or high fructose corn syrup made in the industry with lots of fructose, which is slightly different from the natural fructose that you see in fruits, or also natural fructose that you see even in table sugar, that can make a difference. So I thought that this interlude should be giving you a little bit more insight into what is the mechanism and speaking mechanistically to know a little bit more and what it actually does, more so in terms of what I was always talking about, what is called as mitochondrial dysfunction. So as we know, the mitochondria are the powerhouses or the batteries of all the cells, and that's where energy is made. For every state in our body in terms of needing energy and how we feel in our body and mind, mitochondria is the main organelle that we feel how whether we have energy, we feel like we are full of energy, or we lack energy. This is the most common symptom that we see out in the medical practice, which is fatigue and lack of energy. How these signals make a difference when you have rapid fluctuations of energy, when you suddenly have a sudden dumping of energy, and then suddenly the body dumps you back without energy. So to understand this, first I want you to appreciate a little bit about how the food comes into our system, which everybody knows. This is the stomach, and that's where you have all the food that comes in and digests. Then this is the first part of the intestine, which is called the duodenum, and from here the intestines go along a long way like this, and this goes on for a lot of feet in our body. This is where all the food gets absorbed. Let me use another color here. So that goes on and on for many feet like that, where all the food gets absorbed. So I'm also going to highlight here one aspect. When we eat any kind of food, the point that I'm trying to make is drinking versus eating. When we eat something with a lot of fiber, so I'm going to write it here, fiber, any food that is with fiber, any food that has fat, and any food that is packed with protein. These three are very important for you to understand. If the food is packed with fiber, fat, or protein that it naturally comes with, then what it does is when the food enters here, it takes a longer time for the transit to happen. And when it takes longer for the transit to happen, the absorption is better, and when it gets absorbed into the blood, there will not be any rapid excursions of glucose or other nutrients that we take into the blood suddenly. Whereas if food is devoid of fiber, devoid of fat and protein, like we talked about, like the sodas, the high fructose corn syrup, all canned foods and canned juices, extra sugars when there is no fiber, and when there is no fat, and when there is no protein that naturally comes in the food, but pure sugar, which is called as high glycemic index foods, then the food moves very fast. It moves very fast, and it suddenly dumps, and then it has very less time, and it gets rapidly absorbed in the intestine. So when it gets rapidly absorbed in the intestines actually are designed in such a way that they take all this material that we absorb, the nutrients, I can just put it like this for convenience, through some veins, special veins, which we don't have to mention those names, but for your convenience, it takes everything back like this, these nutrients, into a system called portal system. I am going to name that on the screen, portal system, and that system is actually draining all these nutrients into the organ that most of you know here, which is the liver. Now the liver is the most important organ because all that the liver does is takes everything, and it is like a central door, like a gatekeeper to see whether what is healthy for the body, what is not, how to metabolize it, how to eliminate it from the body, how to absorb it. It decides everything. So the liver health is very important. So when it goes into this area, sudden flooding of any of the food will cause a big bombardment. It goes through a vein here. This is called portal vein. I'm going to list that on the screen. The portal vein will take this food nutrients with a sudden bombardment of these nutrients suddenly. So when that happens, our bodies are not designed for this sudden bombardment, and that the liver cells will go through a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction in each cell. There are many mitochondria, like I mentioned. All these small changes that I talked about are are actually happening in that small mitochondria. So there will be a mitochondrial dysfunction, like I mentioned, and that starts making the additional fat that you don't want to see. I will explain that later. So for today's, this is all the fat that is going to accumulate when the body doesn't know what to do with that sudden bombardment, because it's not metabolized, it's not absorbed properly, or it is not absorbed slowly. Whereas if the food is absorbed with fiber, fat and protein very slowly, the liver can metabolize it well, and there is no fat formation here. So to give you in a different perspective, I would like to put it on this screen about what happens when the blood levels of sugars rise suddenly. Let's say if this is the time here, and if this is the intensity of how high the sugars can go, amplitude rather. So let's say let's keep the sugar levels, which is let's say 75, 80. Let's keep 80 here. I'm going to mark it with 80 here. Let me move another. So if this is 80, and if your sugars are here, and when you eat, your sugars are going up to, let's say, go up and come down, and that is maybe 120, something like that. So that is this central peak, 1 hour peak that you see. This is 0 hour, this is 2 hours, the sugar comes down. So this peak is about 40. And the body can take a peak of 40 in 1 hour, something like that, and the liver can metabolize as well. Whereas if you put sugars and all the foods that don't have fiber, fat or protein, or pure sugars, or any high glycemic index processed sugars, or white kind of foods that we see, the refined ultra processed foods, then the sugar can go up either from 80 or wherever it is to something like that, and come down. So now that you're talking about almost like 200, 210, let's say that's about, let's say 210 to 220, something like that. Now if you see the difference from here to here, this amplitude, this is the peak that I'm talking about, that is flooding suddenly into the liver. So you don't want a change of let's say 120, like almost 140 points here versus 40 points here. So the principle here, that what I'm trying to make you appreciate, is basically any food that we eat has to have two properties. If the food is very optimal, it has to protect the liver, protect the liver, and feed the gut. That means the gut is the intestine, which is all this. So if the food is protecting the liver when you eat and it feeds the gut, then that is the most optimal food. If the food does one of those things, then that is somewhere in between neutral. There are some foods that can help with either the gut protection while they feed, or they may not help the liver that much, but they are somewhere in between neutral. But if a food or anything that you eat does not protect the liver and does not feed the gut, then that's literally a consumable poison. So we're talking about all those sodas and cans and sugars that is causing all this damage because of the dumping of sugars, and this rapid rise of those sugars that's happening is what is causing the mitochondrial dysfunction. I'll go more in detail about this later, but next time when I come, if you understand this concept, when we go into the adenosine monophosphate, the pathway that gets activated sensing the energy system, how it is going to be useful, or how uric acid, a byproduct of fructose, how that makes it take in a different pathway if we consume all those extra sugars, in terms of like high fructose corn syrup or refined sugars. So I'll see you very soon with my next part, which is part 9, to talk a little bit more about the energy system in the mitochondria. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.